Let's do it. Drop it. Juice. Look, ride on them till the world is cracked up and the sky is open. They be telling me lies, took an entire portion of my family portrait and denied the culprit. My mind's insulted, cause I'm assaulted. A king in 16's what I'm assaulting. Battery shattered, the cataracts up in them, see it till I am exhausted. And my vernacular leaving them nauseous. I'm attacking whoever speaking the nonsense. Travel magnificence, piece of their conscience. I'm deep in content with my content. Looking to the light to the east of my continent. Better catch up like condiments. Money never bought a nigga common sense. So when I rhyme, I'm making sure every line condensed with insight. Give insight, even the blind convinced. When you put me in like Popovich. Politics, lots of ticks. Caught your optics for apocalypse. They got lots of tricks, it's like Copperfield. I'm copping still for that martial law. So when I start to draw, it's like Molotovs going across the jaw, ball for ball. Cause nigga, this the art of war. Yeah.
There can be no revolution unless there is bloodshed. There must be bloodshed in order to change the economic system. There must be bloodshed in order to change the political system. There must be bloodshed in order to change the academic and educational system. There must be bloodshed.
There's a war going on outside and the black man got a target on him. All the lies and taught us got our lives distorted. So I just wrote a few bars of warning. It's a call for action. On my top for talking, exercising caution. So the iron on him. If it's time for war, then they'll be riding on him till the earth is cracked and the sky is scorching. The president is in the highest office and y'all already think they ain't buy him off with these bribe skies and donations. I ain't the type to write a rogue statement when it's by hype with no basis. Drones flying by, they don't phase us. To say y'all be robbing no breaks, bitch. Why they spot to find the locations? I'm no patriot, I'd rather raise a fist. And y'all claiming it's unpatriotic. Power by the prowess of my people when it makes me racist. Explain your logic. Make a minge, I'd rather make a profit. So we teach that you truth and raise them conscious. With a revolution comes bloodshed. Y'all can't do a thing about it. Malcolm warned you ain't no way around it. And I ain't no way today they acknowledge. They created a conference and made alliances to raid the continent and rape the continent. Take the knowledge and deface the monuments. Equate everything synonymous. And we'll get to the niggas that they place the bondage just to make them dollars.
All right. I want to welcome everyone to another episode of Melanated and Illuminated. It's been a little minute, but we back on it again. And today, I'm blessed to have, one of the few gentlemen, that I really look up to, that, I look to for advice, I look to for just all around information. He's just a wealth of information, and he has so much going on that's positive within the community that I had to have him on. He is the founder of the Odyssey Project, and he also has a wonderful radio show that everyone has to check out on Bridge to Light Radio called The Black Voice with him and my brother Michael Jordan. Shout out Mike, you know what I'm saying? We're going to have you in here too. But my man, Rick, what's up, man? How you doing today, brother?
Man? First of all, I want to let you know I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor to have younger brothers who do look up to you, who do see that you're doing your best to set the standard, that you're not perfect, but you're committed. And that's what I ask for anybody that I deal with. Is I don't expect you to be perfect, but I do expect you to be committed. When you're committed to something, you push through those imperfections and those mistakes. You make mistakes. You and I just sitting up talking before this started about one of my major mistakes. But the thing is, I got up, I dusted myself off. And I started back with a greater focus than I had before I made the mistake. And I still make mistakes. But the thing is, I'm committed to what I'm passionate about, and that's the advancement of my people.
Oh, yeah. Well, and, one of the main things, I respect about you is, you have a wealth of information and you have no problem sharing it. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people, don't help those that are looking for the right path. They're like, oh, well, you need to find it on your own. And, they won't just give you a little guidance. But at the same time, you don't necessarily tell us what to think, where to go, or whatever. So you just kind of plant that seed to, lead brothers in the right direction.
That's huge. That's huge to me. That thing of sharing without trying to tell a person how to interpret it. What I learned is that even with me in my journey of discovery, I discovered it and I processed it and I digested it at my own pace. It was an epiphany that brought me to where I was. It wasn't somebody drilling me with information and trying to make me think how they think. It was me coming into certain things and having an inquisitive mind and needing answers. And then it led me to where I was. And so what I do is with love, I share information, but I don't tell you how to take that information or what to do with it. And I never speak down to anyone, and I never criticize anyone because they haven't processed the information at the rate that I processed it or that others have. I think that's counterproductive. I have never seen anyone under attack change their perspective or point of view. And so I don't attack, I teach. And that is a difference. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't get that. We tend to want to do things in a way that forces people to think like us. And I don't want a bunch of drones, first of all. I want critical thinkers. I want people who are able to get outside of the boxes. See, what happens is you start life in a box. Well, first of all, no, you start life with an infinite possibility. But as you move in society, they begin to build this box and this frame around you. As an African American, the box is pretty small. And if you don't find a way to step outside of that box through lateral thinking, meaning thinking outside of the box, meaning that there's a reality beyond what you can see, and believing that that reality is accessible by you, then you step outside of the box. But if you're not careful, even stepping outside of the box, you begin to create boundaries of your own with your own limitations. And what I've always tried to do is have no limitations. That I think, and a lot of people look at me and they say, you think too lofty. Your goals are too high. And the thing is, if there's a goal I set and I never reach it, it wasn't because I didn't set it. That's the one thing I'll tell you. I'm going for it. There's nothing you can tell me I can't do. And so I don't look at boundaries. And what I want people to do is those boundaries that I have inadvertently created in my thinking, I want you to bombastically knock those down. So I'm not telling a person you can't challenge me. I'm saying, please challenge me, but challenge me intelligently. Challenge me with facts. Challenge me with possibilities. Oh, I love being challenged with possibilities. You know, when somebody comes to me and says, well, that's pretty cool what you're talking about right there, but have you ever thought about, and I mean, I get excited about that because that's what I want people to do. I want people to get outside of the box. And even when I'm trying to knock walls down, get outside of the boundaries I'm creating while I'm doing that. And that's how we explore the reality of possibility. That's a part of our world in the fourth and fifth dimension. We get so caught up in the third dimension. We let the perceived realities of the physical boundaries lock us in spiritually.
Man, so you have a new book out. I haven't had a chance to read it fully, but you know what I'm saying, I got through the first few chapters and they was fire. So can you just, you know what I'm saying, tell us a little bit about the new book and you know what you have going on over at the Odyssey Project?
Wow, man, the Odyssey Project keeps me busy. Right now I'm pushing roughly around 105 hours a week. All committed to my people. And
this is just to let people know that just because you don't have a 9-to-5, you know, and that don't mean that, you know, you're not putting in work.
No, I put in work. And the thing is, what most people don't realize is in the 13 years that I've had the Odyssey Project going, I've only raised $5,000 from outside donations. So everything else that I do. I find a way to make it happen. I fund it. I make it happen. When I go in and I set up a program for kids that's done solely on me. When I'm doing research can easily go into $200,000 and up a year. You know, from the research assistant to the equipment to data processing, a lot of other things people don't take into consideration. Nobody's funding that. You know, the thing is, we don't have our people funding that. Now, the Jews funded their research. When we talk about what we'll get into later, when we start talking about multi-generational trauma and intergenerational transmission of trauma, the Jews who went through the Holocaust understood that their behaviors, something was wrong, and they wanted to understand so they could deal with it, and they invested millions into the research of intergenerational trauma, and that's how we get to epigenetics, but we don't invest. And so I started with a question. Almost 30 years ago, 1985, I was watching Donahue, and there was a lady on there by the name of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, 1985. And may that sister rest in power as an ancestor.
Yes.
And she was talking about then the Cress theory of color confrontation, which was the work she was pretty much basing all of her lectures and things on at that time. She had not yet published the ISIS papers, which came out, I believe, like 1992. But she was talking about genetic dominance. She was talking about the fact that genetic dominance and the recessive traits that genetic traits associated with Caucasians was one of the reasons why they were so hostile, because we represent just in our existence their annihilation. And so I was like, wait, hold on a minute. And this was on the heels of white academicians suggesting black intellectual inferiority.
Right.
So wait a minute. Here they are suggesting black intellectual inferiority. And here's this woman suggesting superiority in a number of different ways of blacks, and she's doing it in such an intellectual and eloquent way that she's making an argument against the entire thing just by her existence. And so, but what that did is, from Dr. Welsing came the knowledge of Neely Fuller.
Yeah.
And when I come to know Neely Fuller, I began to understand my entire concept of racism was off.
Right.
And so that gave me an entirely different way to view things. And so from getting to know Neely Fuller, I think the next person that popped up was Amos Wilson.
Okay.
And then from Amos Wilson, that came John Heinrich Clark. From John Heinrich Clark, that came Yosef Ben Yakinen. And so these people were coming in, and this wealth of information was just overwhelming. Now, you got to think, when I started this research, I was a junior in high school, and there wasn't no internet.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was in the library. I was writing universities. I was requesting papers that had been written by these people. I was looking for places I could go see film of this. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't no internet, so it wasn't you just log in and find it. It was difficult, but it became my passion. And the question that drove my research was, with all this information in front of us, why have we not progressed one iota?
Man. So let me ask you, what led you to write your latest book? Because I know you already got about what's this, your 16th book? 17th?
Actually, I'm about to drop 17.
Okay.
That's
so this is
17 is Born in Captivity: Psychopathology as a Legacy of Slavery.
Okay.
This is going to be a comprehensive book that deals with every element of challenge in the black community, from the broken home, African American adolescent, young adult, and male violence, economic impotence, all the areas we're struggling in. There's pathologies that lead to that make us vulnerable. We know we have the outside external forces, the exogenous forces that come from institutional racism. We know that that's out there, and we know that that's constantly moving against us. But we are vulnerable because we have internal issues that we haven't dealt with. We're dealing with the trauma, and that's what it always comes back to. But as far as book number 16 is concerned, the miseducation of black youth, that is dear to me simply because I see our youth as our true future. And while we say that cliché-ishly, if that's a word, and you know me, I'll create a word in a minute. But we use it as a cliche that the children are the future, but the children are our future. And they represent our best opportunity to change our thinking, because we have them at the moment that they gain self-awareness. So we get to build their self-concept. On top of their self-concept, we get to develop within them a sense of identity. When they get a sense of identity, then we can direct them and illuminate their purpose. And when they get their purpose, then we begin to place them in a situation where their purpose births passion. And then that passion will drive them through all of the different things that they're going to have to go through in order to be successful. But we get to racially socialize them. We get to culturally socialize them. And we get to prepare them so that when they go out and they meet the forces of indoctrination that are going to be coming from all these different platforms, they already know who they are. They don't buy into the inferiority, the messages. They don't buy into the violence messages. They don't buy into the animalistic messages, that we're animalistic, that we're inferior, that we can't learn, that we're hyper violent. All of these different things that's constantly been bombarded in them through all forms of media. Everywhere you look, the poor image of the black man is being presented. But when you properly racially socialize them, and that's what this book is about, it's the miseducation of black youth in America, the final move on the grand chessboard. Yeah. And what we're talking about is holistic education. While we must understand that certain academic skills may be necessary to accomplish things, education is more than the attainment of academic skills. Education is the empowerment of the student to change the world around them to be more profitable for them. In other words, when I'm in an environment that's diametrically opposed to my purpose, my direction, my goals, then I must have the ability within myself via knowledge versus spiritual capacity versus via emotional stability, and even in some points physical capacity, to be able to shape the world around me, to be able to influence those in my periphery, and be able to say, this is not how it should be, but instead of whining about it, I'm going to engage it, and I'm going to exact change. That's when you educate a child. When you educate a child isn't shaken by going into an environment that is not conducive to their progression. They simply change it. And so that's what the book is about. When you go into it, if you're thinking you're going to find 13, 14 chapters on the academics, there's chapters on academics. There's chapters on, I've got plenty of work if you want to go out there and find work on the disproportionality of referring African-American males to special education and how that ultimately leads to early exit of school, which means they don't graduate, which leads to incarceration. I got plenty of that out there. Yeah. But when you talk about educating, you're talking about taking a child and insulating them in an environment where you are the teacher, where you are constantly pouring into them, where you are talking to them and sharing with them who they are, affirming who they are, giving them the belief system in themselves that they can accomplish anything. That's extremely important. When I think about that and I think about practical application, I think about my kids. I have 7. Well, I got about to have 13 because we about to do this blended family thing. And
Okay.
myself and her 6, but luckily most of them adults. Yeah. But when I think about my daughter specifically, I remember my oldest, who's been married now for almost 10 years, 3 grandkids. She's just turned 31 on the 18th of this month. And I remember when she was a little baby and she hung around me, man. And I would always tell her, I would always ask her, who's the most beautiful girl in the world? And I taught her to say, I am, Daddy. And then I would ask, the second question would be, well, what can you do if you put your mind to it? And the response to that would be, I can do anything I want to. The sky's the limit. And I don't care if I ran across her. If we parted ways and we came back around each other again, the question was going to be, who's the most beautiful girl in the world? And so she heard that time in, time out, all through the day. And what it did is it set the thing. If you watch her now, I told her when I saw the video of her birthday, you are so extra. Yeah. Because she just knows she's beautiful. And then my second daughter, the same thing. And my baby who was in college, not the same thing. Now eventually, you got to answer, well, why you told her she the most beautiful girl? But, the thing is, each of you has something unique about you that makes you the most beautiful girl in the world in that aspect. And that's who you are. And I remember the middle girl, I think it was my sister came to me 2004, 2005. And she was like, I think she's gay. And I said, she's not gay. He said, what makes you think that? Because she's a freshman in high school, and she's not, every time she comes to my house, she's never talking about boys. She's never on the phone with a boy. It's always her little girlfriends, and they said, why don't you ask her? Instead of making that assumption, just ask her. She told my sister, she says, I like boys. I want a boyfriend. She says, but until I find a boy who can treat me the way my daddy treats me,
message,
I'm good. Now, so far, the 2 oldest, the oldest is married. She married her first. The second has been with her first since she got to college, and they are engaged to be married in 2018. Now, have their relationships been perfect? No. But they found someone who would love them. They found someone who would respect them, and they got that from their father. And that's the importance of education. That's education. See, that empowered them to move past the mistakes of choosing somebody that they simply needed to validate their beauty or validate their existence. So they just accepted the guy that told them they was cute. Right. See, when you came to my daughters and told them they was cute, they already knew it. Right. They probably told you before you told them. Right. And I'm saying my time is tone it down a little bit, but the truth of the matter is that's so important. And again, I tell people all the time, I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back because I wasn't a perfect father. But I was there. I'm engaged. I'm still there. I'm still parenting my adult children. Matter of fact, I parent them harder because the world out there is harder on them. Right. The younger kids, I'm like, hey, just sit back there and get behind me. I got you. Right. But them older ones, because they're out there doing things on their own and they're going out there trying, they're slipping and bumping. I saw where my 18-year-old, which is at her freshman year in college at Texas State, she's going to war on social media now on this whole Colin Kaepernick flag thing, and I looked up and I saw like, oh Lord, baby done jumped in the game.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, I know she's gonna get bruised because them people gonna come back and fight and spit. And you might, if you don't have the experience to understand, see, I want her to eventually get to the point to where she doesn't even waste her time debating with whites about racism. Right. But she needs to fight right now. Because she comes from an environment where everybody mixed. She was the class president at an 80% white school. Yeah. So for this is a shake and a wake up for her. But she needs it. And so, but I'm right there. Yeah. I'm right there, and I'm just waiting. And so I'll tell you, man, you don't mess with my babies. You already know. We good, but so we get ready to go.
So before we go to a break, tell the people where they can find the book, and speak a little bit about what you and my brother Mike got going on over at the Black Boys.
All right. Okay, the book is The Miseducation of Black Youth in America, the final move on the grand chessboard. You can get that book at www.educateblackyouth.xyz. That's www.educateblackyouth.xyz. Or just Google it. It's on Barnes and Nobles and other things. But if you order it from my site, you get a signed copy.
Yeah. I got my signed copy.
You get a signed copy. Yeah. But as far as the Black Voice, man, I love Michael Jordan, man. Yeah, man. That's my ace. Yeah, that's my dude, man. That's my ride or die dude, man. Yeah. The dude he's committed.
He introduced
his heart. Yeah. His heart is in it. He's all out, sold out. He reminds me a lot of you and T-Dot, man. Yeah. Just cats that are committed to the struggle, just moving and doing whatever. But we have a show called The Black Voice, which is the continuation of a vision I had that started some time ago, and it kind of stumbled and it fell off for a minute. But I set it to the side, and I had a number of opportunities and invitations from a number of different stations to come jump on the air and do some things, and I kind of sit. And then when I found this opportunity, Black-owned station, Black-owned radio network, and then I had a partner that I looked at and I said, man, that's my ride or die. We can do this. Yeah. And the thing is, man, we got two different backgrounds, but we handle our business on there, and it's no difference in the level of respect and love and passion because we both are committed. And so people can check that out. It's the Black Voice Radio Show. It's on Mondays and Tuesdays at 12 noon Central Standard Time. I mean Mondays and Thursdays at sorry about that. Mondays and Thursdays at noon Central Standard Time, and you can tune into it by logging in to thebridgeoflightradio.com, and you can listen to it immediately there, or you can download the app and listen to it on your phone anytime you get ready. And so check us out there. The wonderful thing about that show, man, is we're expanding. We've got an audience building rapidly in Europe, in a number of different places in Europe, a couple of places in Africa. And so what that means to us is we are creating a different platform. We get to tell our story. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and take a quick little break. Then we'll be right back with my man Rick, and we can get into our topic for today is the epigenetic transmission of trauma. And so my man gonna go in on that, all right? We'll be back. All right. We are back. You know what I'm saying? Back with my man Rick Wallace from the Odyssey Project and the Black Voice, an esteemed author and just all around good man. So today's topic is dealing with the epigenetic transmission of trauma. One thing, man, about Rick that I can say, Rick kind of gets me in trouble with my wife. He doesn't know this, but every time he writes something, like I can basically probably make a book based on like all the blogs that I've printed up from every time you write it. Because every time you write something, I read it, and you know what I'm saying, I may be doing something, I'll be like, yo, I gotta print this up and go back and read it later. So like, you see like my binder, you know what I'm saying? like my house is just full of papers, loose leaf papers everywhere from stuff that I printed up. And my wife's like, why you always got these papers everywhere, whatever. But I'm like, man, this information I need. And so it was one that you wrote, you know what I'm saying, on epigenetics, and it just kind of got me looking into the subject. because I think that there's a lot of things that go on the biological level and the chemical level that are going on within us that we don't necessarily understand about, our actions and things like that. And sometimes we can just kind of get trapped in a bubble of just looking at things from a historical standpoint.
Right.
And not necessarily from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
And, it's kind of like we were talking about being whole. And so, in order to become whole, you have to understand all these various sciences. So, can we just start with explaining what is epigenetics? Because I'm pretty sure most people have never heard of it. And why do you think that we should care about it or study it?
Well, one of the things that I am, first and foremost, is a researcher. It's something that comes naturally, something I've been doing since I was a little kid. And being able to travel through certain spheres of academia helped me hone my skills to become a better researcher. When people talk about the credentials behind my name, I often tell them, that doesn't teach me what I know. That just simply trained me how to go get it and be more effective in doing it, how to compile data and to be able to analyze, anatomize, and categorize that data to better be able to present it in a lucid dissemination or dissertation. And that's what school taught me. So it doesn't necessarily tell you what I know, but it tells you that I'm trained to know. Right. Now, if I decide to know, I know how to go get it. And what happened with the discovery of epigenetics, it actually started with, again, like I told you, in the beginning, it started with me needing an answer of why, with all the answers and all of the information we have from all these great master teachers that came before myself, how are we still not progressing? What is it about us not progressing? And what I found out is that when you go back to it, there's an old African proverb that says, if there's no enemy on the inside, the enemy on the outside can do us no harm. And so what that tells me is, regardless to institutional racism, regardless to all the hostility that's coming from the outside, when we are unified, when we are whole, when we are living in our holistic excellence, there's nothing no one can do to us. We are vulnerable to the attacks from the outside based on the destruction and the implosions and all of the internal conflict that's taking place on the inside. And so that led me to trying to understand, why are we hostile towards one another? Why so much self-hatred? Why is it that black men would rather compete against one another, tear each other down, and fight one another than to stand alongside one another and build? What are the causes of this? And what ultimately transpired was me discovering that, and no matter if I was dealing with African-American adolescent male violence, which is something else I spent a lot of time studying, if I was dealing with incest, if I was dealing with all these issues we have in the black community that nobody wants to talk about, if I was dealing with domestic abuse, if I was dealing with black men having multiple families in multiple homes, all these little things that we keep quiet and never talk about but exist. No matter what I was looking into, trauma kept popping up. Trauma was at the foundation of every pathological behavior that we have internalized as culture. And I tell people it's extremely important that we stop internalizing our poor behavior as a part of our culture. It's not a part of our culture. That's not who we are naturally. That is a result of trauma, consistent trauma. When we look at trauma, because see, one of the things that would happen also is, like, when I start talking about trauma, people were like, okay, man, it's been 150 years. Right. Man, it's time to,
ended a long time ago.
It's 150 years. We need to let that go.
Right.
And so I knew that it was work because having a background in behavioral science, specifically psychology, you know about trauma. It's huge, and you understand that multi-generational trauma exists. I knew that there had been work as far as the Jews were concerned as associated to the Holocaust, but I hadn't really invested myself into it completely yet. But I knew it was there. So I said, the first thing we got to do is to show people that intergenerational transmission of trauma exists so that we can get rid of the argument, it's been 150 years, let it go. So one of the things that you find when you start researching intergenerational transmission of trauma is trauma, when you talk about PTSD, for instance, which is a significant and extensive existence of trauma, both psychologically and physiologically, as well as neurologically. And most people don't understand that. When they think of PTSD, they think you're crazy in the head, something's wrong, fix it up here and everything's gone. But what I understand is it actually initializes as a physiological response. Before it becomes a psychological issue, it's a physiological response because the body senses threat. And when the body senses threat, it releases stress hormones that ignite the fight or flight response, which is a physiological response. Well, what happens is when there's a traumatic event that actually takes place after the threat, and depending on what happens in that response, that physiological response becomes the foundation of how you recall that event. So when you put a person in a situation who has been through a traumatic event and they're suffering from PTSD, when that trigger goes off, the left side of the brain shuts down, so rational thought, speech, and all that goes out the window. And the instinctive part, the reptilian part of the brain, starts to take over. So they literally relive the event physiologically. They're not thinking about it, they're living it. And it totally incapacitates them. Now, over and over again, imagine being in a situation where you're afraid to do this, you're afraid to do this, you're hyper vigilant, you have a fear of foreshortened future, you're hyper aggressive, prone to anger, bouts of anger, all these different things associated with PTSD. Now, that's you being stressed out because you were a slave. You've been free though. You free now. You're a slave. You were 25 when the emancipation came through. You're free. But here, check this out. Right after freedom, you come out. You're dealing with some trauma, but you're free. Well, we already know if we send soldiers overseas to fight in conflict, and they're over there 6 to 9 months, and you bring them back, a large number of them have to be treated for PTSD after being in something for 6 months. You've lived your whole life in it. Right. You've lived your whole life with your children being sold out from under you, your husband being whipped to within an inch of his life, if he lived, or sold away from you after he's fathered children with you. Every day waking up not knowing if you were going to make it to bed or not, working from sun up to sundown. Just all of these different micro and macro aggressions coming at you on a daily basis. You are traumatized. You come out of it, but the trauma doesn't end. You haven't dealt with the fact that you're already traumatized. You haven't been treated for it. You haven't sat down and talked this stuff out and learned how to cope with that traumatic experience. Here comes Reconstruction. 12 years of the Ku Klux Klan terrorizing the South.
Yeah.
Most people don't understand what that was. That's how the South regained and reconstructed itself to do what it was doing before, with slavery having a new name, convict leasing. And we don't understand that.
We don't even understand the 13th Amendment.
Right. You know, the 13th Amendment predominantly gives a reason why you can be enslaved.
Right.
More than it does emancipate the slave. Before the 13th Amendment, there was no ratification of any right to own a slave.
Right.
But when we had the 13th Amendment, it gave a specific way that you could legally enslave someone. So we don't do, but that's what happened. When the 13th Amendment was ratified, right after it was ratified, they began in the South to criminalize behavior that was not normally criminalized, like vagrancy. Vagrancy meant that you didn't have a place to stay and you didn't have a job. So you were just wandering around trying to find stuff to eat. Well, they made vagrancy a crime and locked blacks up for 9, 10, 12 years for vagrancy. Then they leased their labor out to corporations and companies and the same plantation owners that they had just got their freedom from. And so what that's known as in psychology is re-injury. You have a traumatic event, so you have a traumatic event that creates trauma, and so you're traumatized. And then while you're still trying to heal from trauma, somebody comes along and re-injures. It's just like somebody hits you in the leg with a black bat, breaks your leg. Right. 3 weeks later, you're trying to heal, you're hopping around on crutches. They come up and run up on you and hit you in the leg with the bat again. Not only does it re-injure what is already injured and
reverses the healing process, it also injures other parts of your leg that wasn't contacted during the initial attack. So now you're even more traumatized than you were before. But see, it didn't stop with Reconstruction. Right after Reconstruction, you had the Black Codes that shut you out of ownership and wealth. Right after that, you had Jim Crow. During Jim Crow, you had redlining, which locked you out of being able to live where you wanted to live, fund where you wanted to fund, and basically it pushed blacks into ghettos.
We still see that today.
Right. Redlining was the predecessor to gentrification. See, you had redlining, then you went into urban renewal. After urban renewal was benign neglect. After benign neglect, we start to see gentrification. Yeah. All of these lead to the point of pushing people and dispersing us. There's a thing called serial forced displacement, meaning that through policy, economics, and restriction and access to resources, we're able to move into areas where blacks have an enclave and are operating in unity and disperse them.
Yeah, I think you were one of the first people to introduce me to that term, and so that's why now I really don't even say gentrification no more. Serial forced displacement is a perfect way. You know what I'm saying? That explains, you know what I'm saying, the different situations.
Well, gentrification is a term that was used to make it politically correct.
Right.
It was to soften it up. But basically, and what we understand now, we have a wealth of empirical data that shows us that serial forced displacement has all kind of psychological and physiological ramifications, all negative.
That's gonna be another show in itself.
Basically, so how we end up getting to epigenetics is me just looking at constant. I can't go check something and trauma not pop up. Trauma is something we haven't dealt with. It's something that because we've been taught we have to be strong, we don't want to admit we suffer from. We don't want to deal with depression. We don't want to deal with bipolarism. We don't want to deal with any of those type of diagnoses because we associate that with being crazy.
Right.
And so we don't want to deal with it. But until we deal with it, we're going to have these problems. So what happens is there are behaviors that come along with being traumatized. Fear of foreshortened future, hypervigilance, aggressive outbursts of anger, just so many different things that come along with that. Now check this out. Imagine, that's this thing called social learning theory. So if I got children and I'm traumatized, even before they become traumatized, through social learning theory, they learn my traumatic behavior. So that's a thing called traumatic memory. So every time I go through traumatic memory, where I'm reliving my event, I get really edgy when certain things happen. If my trauma came from having an accident when I was sitting at a red light and somebody came up and hit me, T-boned me while I was sitting there for some kind of crazy reason, and now every time I get to a red light, I really start bugging out. Right. My kids are there when I do that. They're learning their behavior. They will automatically start to become tense every time we put up to a red light without ever knowing why.
Right, and that's how it's passed from generation.
That's
to generation.
one of the ways is through social learning theory. I'm learning the behavior even if I'm not traumatized. Now, don't you think somebody that's traumatized will traumatize somebody?
Absolutely.
You don't think snapping on them kids for no reason at all is traumatizing them? You don't think hitting them for no reason at all is traumatizing? You don't think whooping them like Massa whooped you is traumatizing? Yeah. And so I traumatized them. But what most people weren't ready for, and I wasn't ready for, was epigenetics. Epigenetics was actually something, epigenesis is actually a natural occurring process that we've been knowing about since the 40s. It's a genetic process through which genetic tags are passed along through, and the thing is, another thing that really was exciting to me is this study pushed me into another realm of another discipline, which is biology and genetics, which is not my area of expertise. So I had to actually get in and say, I like stuff. I like going into places I haven't been before and having to tackle it because I need to understand it. And so it brought me into this place. But basically, the simplest way to explain epigenetics is there's a process, a cellular process in biology known as mitosis. Okay. Mitosis is the process of cellular reconstruction. In other words, when a cell gets old and it's time to regenerate a new cell, it actually regenerates two cells that are identical to it. And then it diminishes and those two cells take over. It's called mitosis. I mean, the cells are identical in every way. Well, when you go through the reproductive process, the cell reproduction process is known as meiosis. And in meiosis, there are a couple of other processes that take place. in the addition to reproduction of cells, there's also a purging process. In other words, when both male and female actually go through meiosis, you got to remember that the making or the conception of a child is 23 chromosomes from a parent, from a mother, 23 chromosomes from a father, giving 46 chromosomes. But what happens is when these chromosomes are passed on, they are what are known as epigenetic tags that have developed over life. In other words, epigenetic tags are impressions within the genetic makeup of a person that are reflective of their environment. If they've had a rough life, if they've had traumatic events, if they've gone through a bout of sickness, those tags are embedded within their genetic makeup. Now, it does not change the genetic code or genetic sequence, but it changes genetic expression. And it has the power to, it has the power to turn on certain genes and turn off certain genes, so it impacts behavior. It impacts responses.
Go into that a little more.
Okay, say for instance,
like explain.
Say for instance, I'm the progenitor, meaning that I'm the parent. I'm the progenitor, so I'm going through life. I'm a slave. I've been whipped to within an inch of my life 7-8 times over the course of my life. I've had my life threatened. I've fallen in love with a woman only to have her sold off from me. I've had my kids sold off from me. I've seen all kind of atrocities that I can't even talk about. And now here I am, and I'm free, but I met this woman, and I'm going to procreate. So when I procreate, the genetic process that takes place passes on my 43 chromosomes and her 43 chromosomes to create the child. Well, when you talk about epigenetic tags, the impressions of my life are in my genetic stream. It's a part of my DNA. So when I pass it on, but here's the wonderful thing about how awesome the Creator was. He actually created, when a woman goes through her cycle, she purges her genetic tags so that when she produces an egg, it's rid of the epigenetic tags. And the same process happens with a man, but it's not as open, you don't see it. So, but what happens is when you have extreme genetic tags, those genetic tags get passed. What the process of meiosis is meant to do is to rid the body of the genetic tags so that every new life gets a new start. In other words, you're not passing on your damaged baggage to your progeny. However, when it's that extreme, those tags get by. Now, epigenetics tags work two ways when we're talking about trauma. The first way is you pass it on. How we discovered the part about the genetic influence of passing on trauma was actually there were Jews who were the children of prisoners of war. They weren't there, but they were the offspring of those who were. And they were defining with great clarity events that their parents had went through that their parent hadn't even shared with them. They were having nightmares. And these nightmares were so clear, they couldn't understand, so they started to do the research, and that's how we get to that. So basically, the first thing epigenetics does is allows you to pass on the damage and even the traumatic memory on to your offspring. Unconsciously. It's there.
Right.
They act in a certain way and don't know why. They fear certain things, don't know why. Have a natural behavior or proclivity to do things that are counterproductive or dangerous and don't know why. But that's not the only thing. The second thing that happens with the epigenetic tag that moves from one person that's been traumatized onto their progeny is that a epigenetic tag that comes from that has a imprint of trauma makes that child more vulnerable to trauma. So if they go into a traumatic event, the chance of them being traumatized is a lot more. So you have to understand that everybody that has a traumatic event isn't always traumatized. Right. You got people that were in one of those twin towers when they began to collapse and safely got out by the hair of their chinny chin chin. And they're not traumatized. They gone on to live normal lives, whatever. They got checked out and had a few counseling sessions and they were good. Then you got people who saw it on TV, wasn't even in New York, that's still taking medication.
Wow. Yeah, true.
Because they were traumatized by it.
Right.
And so that speaks to the vulnerability of why some people are traumatized by some events and some not. Also, the ability to take, the ability to control. See, what we know also about PTSD is that people who are traumatized are normally people who were in a traumatic event and lost control, meaning that they weren't able to participate in their salvation. Okay. So because the person who was in the building worked their way out and figured their way out and participated in being saved, even if they found somebody that ultimately got them out, they participated. Right. They weren't just laying there helpless and somebody came and drug them out. They participated. That participation in having some control and not being in a situation where you've lost total control leads to a better faring after the event, to where you're less likely to be traumatized by the event. Now, the person watching it on TV has absolutely no control whatsoever what's happening. They either stop looking at it, right, but once you see it, it's there. Right. So that could actually be why they're traumatized, and the person who was actually there but was able to work their way out of it wasn't. But what happens is, now you're vulnerable. So you got the passing on, the genetic transition from the progenitor to the progeny. You got that. So that's there. Now you got the higher vulnerability. Lastly, you got the what's known as re-injury or the projected. So in other words, I'm still living life, so life is going to do some things to me. Right. I'm not going to get through life without running into some rough things. So now I'm developing my own genetic tags that are going to affect me. And where that study came in epigenetics was in understanding how twins who are identical come out and they're totally identical. Okay. But the older they get in life, the less they look alike. One may be sickly, one may be completely healthy, one may look better, one may be more prone to disease. And what it boils down to is, the older you get as an identical twin, the more individualized your experience. When you're young, you're everywhere your sister is, right, you're everywhere. Right, y'all eat the same thing. Right. Y'all have the same engagements with your parents. But as you get older, you start doing your thing and they start doing their thing, the individualized experiences come to play. So we start to find out that life itself is impacting the epigenetic tags. And if you already have an epigenetic predisposition for trauma, and now you're experiencing trauma, then you have the physiological, neurological, and psychological elements all in jeopardy. And so, and obviously, man, we talk about the different elements of this. Like, for instance, there's a new gene that's being studied now in the area of epigenetics. It's the BKP5 gene, I believe it is. And it's the gene that's affected when you're bullied. And, you know, we come from an environment and a time, I know I'm older than you, and I come from a time bullying was just a part of life. Right. You sucked it up, you took it to the bully, right, and when you took it to the bully, he left you alone. Right. What we're finding is we're living in a time now where people can bully in so many different ways. See, you know, I can bully you with the keyboard. Right. And I can push and, you know, do little things and play little games with you and all that. But we're finding out that gene is determining things like depression, inability to respond, and a bunch of other different things. So again, we're seeing that the more helpless we become, the more powerful epigenetics becomes. And so the ability to develop coping mechanisms that allow you to deal with your trauma, that allow you to deal with a lot of the things you're going through, that's what you're seeing in the development. See, a lot of the behaviors that people are looking at and saying, man, that's black culture. They do this, they do that. You know, when a mom is in a store and she makes sure that the kid stands right next to her and bet not move, that's actually a pathological behavior that was passed down from slavery, because letting your child wander in slavery could mean that the child didn't come back. Right. And so if you're a slave and you know you got to keep your son or your daughter close by you because master could be right around the corner and any little thing can happen, and you know it, so you just got this fear, constant fear that where's my baby, and you got that baby around you. Well, now that you're no longer a slave and you're out there, but you still got that same fear, it's ingrained in you. That's something else we learned with dealing with epigenetics. That took me into neurology. And neurology, the best way I can explain neurology is the merging of genetics and psychology.
Okay.
And what we learn about neurology is that the body maps behavior. In other words, like for instance, you have a stroke victim. A stroke victim has a stroke and sustains damage to the left side of the brain. Well, the left side of the brain is your rational part of your brain. That's the brain that's able to calculate, sequence, articulate, and all that. So you can't speak now. You can't organize thought. None of those things, because all that comes from the left side. What you do is you go to a speech therapy. Once you heal enough to where you can get out, you go to a speech therapist. What a speech therapist does is trains your right side of the brain to perform the task that the left side used to do. Once it's damaged, brain cells are damaged, they're damaged. So the way that you get around that is you teach the right side to do it. That's why you see people and they can do it, they can't do it as good as they used to.
Right.
Because it's just like if I start shooting ball with my left hand and I'm right-handed,
Right.
I'll get better and better as time goes, but when I first start off, it's ugly.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing. But what we found out was that there were literally a neurological remapping of the brain taking place when that training is going on. It's not just a superficial or an aesthetic fixed where they plug the right side over and say, now do this.
Nah.
It's literally remapping how the brain detects, processes, and disseminates the information. And all of that is being remapped. And what we found is infants as early as 1 month and 2 months are actually having their brains neurologically mapped on how they respond. That's why you get some kids that are totally detached, no feelings, because mama and daddy weren't around giving it to them when they were first born. So literally the neglect that they felt as infants, and see the reptilian brain is the first part of the brain that actually develops inside the womb before the limbic system starts to develop after you're born, and allows you to start communicating and understanding verbal commands.
Yeah.
You understand by facial expressions. That's why a baby responds to the mother's face. That's why the reptilian brain allows you to interact and receive that energy from your parents without understanding verbally what they're doing. You hear the verbal stuff, but that ain't what you're responding to.
Right.
You're responding to the facial expressions, the warmth, the touch, all of those things your brain responds to. And it's telling you that you're loved even though you don't know what love means.
Yeah, man.
And so that maps out how you respond to things moving forward. So, and then it also tells you how you react to things.
Right.
You ever seen a child, you walk up to them and you raise your hand and they jump?
Yeah.
Neurological mapping. That's not a conscious move. That's an instinctive subconscious move.
Yeah.
They're jumping without ever thinking.
Right. Trying to protect themselves.
Right.
Man, that's heavy, man. So we finna go to another break, but before we do that, you see a lot about the experiments about the babies. You know what I'm saying, when they look at the white doll and the black doll, and they say one is ugly, one is pretty. Is that a product of epigenetics, or epigenetic trauma passed on? Or is that something different?
No, that's more probably akin associated to social learning theory. I'm in an environment that's constantly presenting a certain image of what beauty is, a certain image of what is good and what is bad, a certain image of what is best and better versus worst. And so I internalize those images. So when you constantly show me that thin white women with long straight hair are beautiful, my natural assertion is, since they are beautiful and then this is how my hair is, then I'm not. And so when you ask me to pick one I like, I naturally have a yearning to want to be beautiful. I naturally have a yearning to want to be accepted. And so I choose that which I think is most acceptable. But I reinforce, with every time I choose it, I reinforce the inferiority complex.
Man, okay. Ooh. Yeah, so we're gonna go take a quick break, and we're gonna come back and close up. My man Rick, he gonna get into some solutions and things like that, that we can do right now, today, individually and as a community to get over. Well, I don't think "get over" is the correct word, but just give some solutions to heal.
Yeah, right.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, peace and blessings, family. Right back at it again, my man Rick. But in closing, I'm always a solution-oriented person. I try not to just only look at the problems because, like me personally, I can't see a problem without starting to think of a solution because, that's just the way my brain works. The fact of that I never see things as have to stay the same or this is how things have to be. And I know, saying I've said this before on multiple occasions, but one of the reasons I keep bringing it up is just because, like Rick alluded to earlier, you see all the different solutions and historical things and research that have been put out there. But, the question I always get is, why with all this information out there, why don't our people get it? And a lot of people talk about the knowledge of self and then knowing our history and knowing who we are, which is a big part of it. But one thing that we tend to overlook is the importance of the things that we're putting in our body, consuming in our diet and things like that, and how that affects our thinking. And so while reading the book, that I love so much, Breaking the Curse of Willie Lynch by Alvin Monroe, he's dealing with the science of slave psychology. And, it takes you through the animalization process and, how psychologically they separate you from nature in order for you to, in order to treat you that way and for you to continue to respond accordingly. Right. But one solution that he proposed, just sticks out in my head so much. And he says, by getting the black masses into an in-depth study of social sciences, along with the proper diet, that will automatically trigger the proper chemical effects from the brain through the central nervous system, tapping into and reversing the condition of a contaminated cell structure. And, that thought that just blew my mind. So, Rick, can you speak to that a little bit about the importance of diet and how it affects, when we talk about biology and psychology, and then also get into some other solutions that you may have personally to heal?
I think that what you just read is extremely important because one of the things that I taught, the first area of expertise that I entered into professionally was health and fitness. That evolved into health and wellness. And then it evolved into holistic wellness. And in understanding holistic wellness, it taught me the principal concept of holistic living, holistic existence. Everything exists in a holistic balance. And anytime that thing or entity or whatever it is comes out of balance, you're dealing with disease. That's what disease is, dis-ease. So it moves into a part of disease. Everything we're prone to now with heart conditions, cancer, all of that is actually due to a lack of balance, holistic balance in our existence here in the third dimension. So when you start talking about neurological imbalances, psychological imbalances, physiological imbalances, they can all be impacted by nutritional imbalances. So when you start talking about holistic health, when you start talking about healing, in order to actually be completely healed, there has to be an entire healing process or holistic process in place. So you're talking about nutritionally. If I'm not eating correctly, and Dr. Sebi was the champion of that. Yeah. And
R.I.P.
Right. And you start talking about that. You start talking about understanding the importance of bringing your body's pH balance into line. Well, see, what happens is when everything is in line and in balance, you have what's known as equilibrium. Equilibrium brings you to this place where you're in total or holistic existence. Everything is lined up and it's working together in a unified manner. Well, when you start talking about imbalance, it's like, okay, if I experience an imbalance over here, then that creates a deficiency. Well, now that deficiency needs to be supported because there's a certain functional level. If I've got to walk this way, if I've got to walk upright, and then I damage my left leg, then my core muscles start to make an adjustment to allow me to continue to walk in a certain way, to alleviate the pain, but to keep going. And so, but what happens is over time, that core muscle is being strained because it's carrying a weight that it wasn't meant to carry. That's what happens psychologically when you don't have the balance. When something is happening in one area and you don't deal with that, you create an imbalance where something else has to come in and make the adjustments to basically make up for the imbalance. Well, what happens is, in a situation like that, you need to, first of all, you need to be aware of your consciousness. One of the most in-depth papers I've done is on theories I developed, which was cognitive bias reality syndrome, which is the influence of negative cognitions and biased cognitions and distorted cognitions on human behavior. It was the influence on social mobility and social behavior. So that's how I got into understanding why we act the way we act. Right. And that led to everything else. And so we have to, I tell people all the time that the facts mean absolutely nothing to the conditioned mind.
Ooh, say that again. Say that one more time.
Facts mean absolutely nothing to the conditioned mind. So what I tell people all the time is, when I go into a situation and I see somebody is functioning from a conditioned mindset, that they are operating from that brainwashed position, they have not been relieved of that. The first thing you have to understand, you don't overcome conditioning with facts. You overcome conditioning with reconditioning. And you don't, it's not a forced process. It's a process of exposure. Whatever your subconscious is exposed to the most, it will adopt and it will create as principle. So if I want the principal thought to be that of superiority, then I expose the stimuli. I expose the subject to the stimuli that constantly suggests over time in a number of different ways superiority. The same way if I want someone to feel inferior, I expose them to consistent stimuli that suggest that they are inferior. Not one particular purpose. That's why people, when Scandal was out and I was making my point on Scandal, or when Empire came out and I made my point, that's just one show. So you telling me that this, and there's somebody. I said,
it's going there, coming for you.
I said, and what my point I was trying to get across at the time was, it's not Scandal. It's not Empire. That those are reinforcers.
Right.
It's that everywhere you turn, you're seeing the same behavior. You see it on Real Housewives of Atlanta. You see it on Real Husbands of Hollywood. You see it on all these different things. Blacks behave in a certain way. Right. You see it with our men, the emasculation of our male actors and our athletes in dresses, in makeup, with painted nails. All these different things that are a part of that presentation. That is again presenting an emasculated image. It does. What you got to understand is, when you talk about the black male and the integral role he has to play in the elevation and empowerment of our people, you have to understand that you don't have to have a man, become a homosexual to become ineffective. The more effeminate he becomes, the more emasculate he becomes, the less effective he is. Women will love you. They'll talk about, oh, he's a what's the term? They metrosexual. He's a metrosexual guy. He's this, he's that. And they love their gay friends, their gay guy friends. But you never heard one say, I will follow you. Women follow masculinity. They'll talk about it, oh, he's but they follow masculinity. It's the energy that's created from a masculine man that says to a woman, I can trust him. Because ultimately, the first thing a woman wants to be able to trust you with is her life.
Right, got to protect
you. You got to be able to defend her life. And that comes from a place of masculinity. Am I with a guy that when it all breaks out will be hiding behind me?
Right.
Or standing in front of me? Right. And so now, because you're leading me as my protector, now I'm more willing to listen to what you have to say when you start talking about strategies.
Right. Now, I think that's a great point to bring on, you know what I'm saying, when you talk about, you know what I'm saying, women being attracted to masculinity, you know, and how on both sides, from women and dudes, it's not just about telling her what to do and how to follow you or anything else like that. It starts with that feeling that she has with you being able to protect her.
Right.
And that she can always depend on that. Right. And then from there, that's where things, you know, like you said, like more willing to listen to your thoughts and ideas and your leadership. Right. But it starts with, you know what I'm saying, the man being a man and being able to stand up and protect his woman. Right.
Yeah, I'll say this and then we'll move on to looking at solutions. But the thing is, and actually this is a solution. Yeah. The thing is this. when I'm a man and I'm functioning as a man, I don't have to tell a woman anything. Woo. When I'm functioning as a man, meaning that I put her first, meaning that I am willing to die to protect her, meaning that she can look at me and know that her best interest is at heart. Right. I don't have to tell her to follow me. If you're having to demand to a woman to follow you, you're not leading. Ooh. When you are leading, she naturally falls in because she's spiritually drawn in to that leadership. Yeah. And she can even see how she fits in the equation. She's looking at you. And see, the thing is, while the man is given the vision, the ultimate vision, it's the woman that births it. Mm. And when you have a situation where you don't have your spiritual incubator, right, and you don't treat her right, let me break it down to you. Yeah.
So get your boy some game, man. Get your boy some
let me break it down to you.
We need some help right now, man.
And this is what happens. A man has a vision. If you go back and you look in time and you look at the different religions, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Abraham, whether you look at the Christian progression, and you start talking about the beginning of time and man is given the vision. And there's a reason why there's this saying that stands behind every good man is a good woman. Because when you look at the man, there's always this thing. You look at Malcolm, you see Betty. You look at Martin, you see Coretta. And you start to say, okay, you look at Medgar, and you see Everly. I mean, so you start to see that there's this consistency. Well, this is what happens. When a man is given the vision, when he has the vision, he sees it. He starts to move toward it. That's his responsibility. He's trying to work toward it. But when he comes in contact with that woman, the first thing she should ask him is, what is his vision? Our women have been trained to ask us where we work, what we drive, where we live, what's our career, what you do. Yeah. Now, what you do tells me where you're at now. But when you tell me your vision, it tells me where you're going. And because it tells me where you're going, I can now line up my vision of what I have inside of me and say, well, that's the same place I'm going. We can work together and get there. Now, the one thing I can tell you about a woman and why men must treasure our women is because they're natural incubators. Absolutely. You're married.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Man, I've been sitting up, man, and I tell my girl, hey, give my mom, this is back in the day, give my mom send my mom this birthday card or Mother's Day card or whatever. I picked it up for her. I ain't got time to drop it and mail it. Make sure she gets it. Man, when I get over my mom's house, a few weeks later when I'm back in town or whatever, and I get to my mom's house and I look at the card, it's got stuff drawn on it. Yeah. It was some stuff attached to it. Right. My mom said it was $100 bill in it. Yeah. And I'm going like, I gave you a card and she got a book. What happened? Yeah. But women are incubators. You give them something and it never comes back the way you gave it to them. If you give them a card, it becomes a book. If you give them groceries, it becomes a meal. If you give them a house, it becomes a home. If you plant your seed in it, if you plant your seed in a physical womb, 40 weeks later, it returns to you, your progeny, your child, that organic piece of matter that becomes just like you in so many ways and just like her in so many ways. If you give her your vision, she will put it in her spiritual womb and birth it. And it will be at that point that the vision takes life. And I always tell people, when y'all talk about that behind every good man is a good woman, I prefer to say behind every great man or beside every great man stands a great woman. Do you know why she's great? Because she's aware of all of his weaknesses. Right. But instead of exploiting his weaknesses, she covers them. Right. Instead of degrading him and sharing his weaknesses with her friends, she holds them dear and protects them, allowing him to function in his strengths, knowing that it's okay to be weak because she's got his back. Right. And that is what we're working. One of the biggest things that we're struggling with now is the broken home. Because, see, we talk about holistic education earlier, right, but you can't holistically educate when all parties aren't available. at all times. When you're sitting up, got a mother trying to carry out multiple duties, the feminine energy and the masculine energy, and trying to do that, she can't even teach her son how to use the restroom. Right. He learns to pee standing up by watching daddy. That's not something daddy actually tells him to do. Right. His natural desire to want to be like daddy says, daddy's doing it this way. Then I'm going to do it this way. Now, you're going to clean up a lot of stuff early on. Right. But the bottom line is that's something that he learns by watching the modeling of a man. The same hostility we're dealing with this thing they love to bring up when we're talking about police brutality. They love to talk about, quote, unquote, black on black crime.
You always say that.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, number one is most people talking about it don't understand it. Because, see, we're still dealing with the improper management of how we raise our children. While most people think, no, he just needed a whipping. No, that's not what it is. Let me explain something to you, man. When I studied the work of Dr. Howard Stevenson out of University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Joy DeGruy out of the University of...
she's awesome.
Yeah, the University of Portland is what she's doing her work. Now, everybody knows her for post-traumatic slave syndrome, but she's done a lot of work on African-American adolescent male violence. I've taken it and expanded on it with African-American adolescent and young adult male violence and understanding how we get to the point where we got kids in the hood shooting up each other and doing drive-bys and all the other havoc that they're wreaking in the community. And it's not somebody needs a whooping. Right. What we're dealing with is a situation that young black men haven't been properly socialized. And because there are not men there to teach them how to move into their masculinity. See, your masculinity is a natural part of your progression towards manhood. See, that aggression that you're starting to feel around 11 or 12 or maybe even 10 is the increase in the levels of testosterone in your body that naturally makes you more aggressive, more easier to upset and anger. And what normally happens is you have a man there telling you before it ever happens that it's going to happen and what it's for. It's for you. That aggression that you're feeling is actually meant to help you be able to take care and protect your family, protect your sisters and brothers. And when you get older, protect your girlfriend and wife, protect the community. As a man, your first responsibility is to protect, and you're built to protect. Right. Because, see, I'm socializing you. Now, when you want to look at a good example of racial socialization for young men, look at the Jews. They have a process of where they train and teach their children as a male what you will become and what's expected of you. When they reach the age of 12, they have what's known as a bar mitzvah. Right. The bar mitzvah is actually simply a celebration that says that I've learned who I am, what my responsibilities are, and how I will carry them out. Today is the day that I start. That's all a bar mitzvah is. I move into manhood. From this point on, my father is going to give me more responsibility in my own decision making. Yeah. He's going to allow me to have some consequences when I make the wrong decision, but he's going to be there to hold me up to make sure that I don't fall down too far. And he's already shown me. And so I take a responsibility that has taught me to be pro-social. In other words, I understand that my existence isn't actually about me. It's about us. And so when I make a decision as a Jew, I don't just make it for me. I make it for all Jews.
For the community.
Right. And so when you teach and socialize that, it automatically sets an expectation. It also gives a value to being a Jewish boy. Because if I don't do my job, things fall apart. Well, see, when we haven't socialized African-American youth, they don't understand the role they play. They're being told every day that they're inferior. They've been told every day that they don't matter. They've been told every day that they're worthless. They've been told every day that you ain't going to amount to anything. You're never going to be nothing. Right. Sometimes they're being told that by parents. So you expect to put that into their mindset without having given them a clear understanding of who they are. Now you want them to perform and behave in a way that is conducive to the growth of the community when you didn't properly socialize them. What we learned when we look at the violence in the black community is that we learn, first and foremost, that black on black crime is an arbitrary expression that's meant to propagate inferiority and hatred towards blacks. But until we're talking about white on white crime, Latino on Latino crime, Jew-on-Jew crime, Asian-on-Asian crime, then we don't have black-on-black crime. Now, do we have interracial inner-city violence? Yes, we do. Is it an issue that we need to deal with? Absolutely. But we have to be careful at the terms we use because they polarize us and they isolate us, and then it makes it difficult. You want to know why people fear us? It's because that image is constantly being put out there that blacks can't control themselves. They're naturally violent. If you get too close to one of them, you're liable to get hurt. Right. And so we have to be careful how we put that out there. Do we need to deal with it? Yes. But what we found is when it comes to African American adolescent and young adult males, there are some core influences as to their proclivity or risk to perpetrate violent acts. The first is having been a victim of violence themselves. Having been a victim of violence does two things. It makes them a victim, which will automatically mean they're probably traumatized, and they will react based on the symptoms of trauma, one of which is violence if pushed into a corner. Then you have the other element of being victimized, of being having experienced it, and that is it desensitizes violence. Well, the next one is having seen or witnessed violence, which is another desensitizer. It desensitizes violence. Well, one thing when we start talking about desensitizing violence is now, once I become desensitized, remember, my conscious, that thing that triggers when I'm doing something I shouldn't be done, is set by what's known as norms and standards. Okay. The norms and standards set your conscious. What becomes a part of norms? When you exceed the norm and standard behavior in a certain direction, it triggers your conscious, and you get this feeling of guilt. You get this feeling of remorse. You get this feeling of, I shouldn't do this. Well, what happens is, because you become desensitized to violence, violence doesn't trigger your conscious, and it becomes easier to do. Well, then the third thing is urban hassle. Urban hassle is all the things that anybody that grew up in the inner city dealt with. Having to navigate through gang activity to get to school, having to navigate through drug use to get to school, having to deal with cops messing with you for no reason to get to school, having to try to sleep through the night when you're hearing gunshots and sirens. If you live on the East Coast or in the Midwest up north, places like Philly, New York, New Jersey, Chicago, where you got L trains, having the L train run by your house in the middle of the night, all of those things are called urban hassle. And that, because it moves against you in so many ways, you're always on edge. There's never this peace. And so that elevates your proclivity to, at some point, perpetrate an act of violence. But those are the core areas. Those are your baseline. That's going to be there with almost any person that's violent on a consistent basis. The two major indicators, number two, the lack of proper racial socialization. You have not been socialized into African culture or into the race of being a black. So you don't understand who you are. You don't understand what's expected of you. You're not familiar what is considered pro-social behavior. Right. So you're just out there trying to find your way and do whatever it is. But the number one influencer in African American adolescent and young adult male violence is the feeling of being disrespected. That ego. A feeling of being, but what that comes from, again, you go back to socialization. What it comes from is not having a male to show you how to manage. You're going to get angry. Right. But you have a man, you get to see daddy. Daddy got angry. He didn't hit mom. Daddy got angry. He didn't go up there and blow dude's brains out when he got angry at him. Right. Daddy did this. Daddy did that. This is what a man does. See, when you're taught that it's not just about you, it's about the community, right, the first thing that you're not going to do is do something that will have you taken away from that responsibility. So if I shoot this nut, I'm going to jail. Right. And then I'm going to have all his peeps trying to get at me. Right. And it's just this cycle. And that's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with this cycle of retribution, of trying to repay back. So those are the things we're looking at. When we're talking about, as far as epigenetics is concerned, man, that's a healing process. Yeah. We've got to have engagement. What you read there, man, was very, very powerful. What we have to have is a natural conditioning process. That's why the black voice is so important to me. The black voice is that place where you hear positive stuff about blacks. You hear blacks defending blacks instead of attacking blacks. You hear, we're here, but we are going here. It's a platform that we're hoping to grow. And for it to be one of many, because when you're talking about over 13,000 media platforms in America, and we own in less than 80. How can we compete against the narrative that's been written about us being lazy? How can we compete about the narrative of us being violent? How can we compete about the narrative of us being deadbeat fathers? And we get to frame, when we have our own platform, we get to frame the message. We don't get to first of all, we get to write the narrative and tell the story accurately, which is not happening now. Second of all, we get to frame the context of this is what happened. This is what happened, but this is why it happened. And we get to understand that, okay, you know, Ray didn't just jump out there and go off and just decide he's finna start killing everybody. You know, Ray went through this, and this. Now, we're not excusing Ray, but you need to understand that certain behaviors, certain realities, certain environments create certain things. You can't get around that. If you want to change the thing, you change the environment. You change the behavior. If you want your kids to perform better, you treat them better. You provide a more safer environment for them. And what we have to do is stop waiting on everybody to get on board. We are people that are highly individualized in our thinking, and the idea of all of us getting on board at some point because we are pressured to is not going to happen. What we are, almost more than anything, are bandwagoners. So what you want to do, if you want people to start moving in a certain direction, start moving in that direction, do some positive things, build momentum, and watch them jump on.
Right.
That's how you have to do it. You have to start it off willing to be alone. Because what I can tell you, the right side of things is lonely. Trying to do the right thing is lonely. See, what I've seen is we get more kicks out of watching our brothers beef.
Right. World star.
We love to see our brothers beef. And even when it comes to our quote-unquote leaders, one of the things that really got to me, and I reached out to both of these brothers, and it seems to have settled down, but I reached out to both of them, was when Umar Johnson and Boyce Watkins was going at it. Brother, this is not how we're going to do things. Right. Now, I felt a certain way about how it went down, but I dealt with it in private.
Right.
Because we need to stop letting them see us beef, because we're setting the tone.
Right.
We're going to have disagreements, but if you got a problem with me, come to me. We don't need the beef out there. And the thing is, that's what we eat that up.
Right, yeah. Unfortunately so. And this, that reminds me of something that Kwame Ture says, about, all the different things going on within the black movement and how if we got the same objectives, we can't fall out over the methods. And, a lot of people end up falling out over the methods, and, that creates, that disunity and that divide and conquer amongst those that have following. I'm not just talking about like those that are just individual and no one knows. Because then when you start talking about actually having a following, then they people end up going at they people.
Right, and that's what happens, man. You got this divide. Now you're even more divided along these lines where Umar's people getting at Boyce's people getting at Umar's people, and that's what happens, man. If I share anything, man, it's this. We've got to do a better job of loving on one another. We've got to do a better job of being patient with one another. Nobody becomes awakened at the same pace.
Right.
So we're not gonna have this moment where we wake up one morning and all blacks are awakened and now we're ready to make moves. We're gonna awaken at different times, different situations, different circumstances will determine how your process takes place. And so we've got to be patient with one another. We've got to show love. We've got to be willing to give love to one another. That natural hatred that's on the inside of us, that's eating at us, that causes us to strike out against our brother, and then give the enemy a pass. I mean, I'm sick and tired of hearing, I forgive them for killing my brother, or for killing my husband, or for killing my son. But turn around and you got a 40-year grudge with your sister.
Right.
I mean, your biological sister.
Right.
You ain't spoke to her in 40 years. And that's what's going on with me. We've got to put that thing aside. We've got to understand that we have youngsters looking at us, and they're trying to determine if this thing that we're talking about fighting for is worth fighting for. And they're looking at it, and they're expecting something for us. They're not expecting us to turn around and pass the torch to them and say, okay, y'all do something with it. Right. They're expecting us to take the steps to give them something that they can actually stand on. Generation after generation, our children start at ground zero. With no wealth, no foot in the door, nothing to look back and say, okay, well, when my dad started, he was right here. Now we're right here, so I get to start here. No, I'm starting right where my dad started. Right. Well, that's not acceptable. And we've got to feel the responsibility as black men to lead our communities. And we do that first by loving our women. And so that's it with me, man. I mean, love our women. The whole thing with genetics is just one part of a huge puzzle. And we're talking about the spiritual elements, which is the top. We're talking about physical. We're talking about mental. We're talking about neurological, psychological. All of those things have to line up. And that starts with a healing process. You have to, the first part of the healing process is emptying the toxins of racism.
Yeah.
The toxins of trauma. And so that's what it's about with me, is engaging people, showing them love, giving them an option, giving them hope, getting rid of the despair.
Right.
And building. If you want somebody to help build something and then give them something to look at and say, this is what's possible, and then get them to come on in. So that's what we're doing.
Man, my man, powerful, man. I really hope y'all enjoyed this. You know, we're going to have it up on SoundClick and YouTube. Before we get out of here, Rick, I want you to give the people three things. Tell them where they can find some more of your works. Tell them where they can go to review and donate to the Odyssey Project, and also tell them where they can go and listen to the Black Voice.
Okay, as far as viewing my work, you can view a lot of it on the Odyssey Project site. I make sure that I put a lot of my work there so that you have some resources to go read to. You can also donate on the site. There's a donate tab, and you can find the site at www.theodysseyproject21.com. As far as the radio show, The Black Voice, you can also click on the tab, The Black Voice, on the Odyssey Project site, and all the links that you need to listen to the show are there, or you can go directly to www.thebridgeoflightradio.com and listen there. As far as other resources, they're all over the place. You can go to yunpu.com, and a lot of my academic work is there. You can Google Dr. Rick Wallace or Rick Wallace PhD, and you'll find a lot of my work listed that way. You can also go to educateblackyouth.xyz to get the book, The Miseducation of Black Youth in America. And finally, the latest book is coming out in a few weeks, Born in Captivity, Psychopathology as a Legacy of Slavery, and it is a comprehensive book. We deal with everything that we're going through in this book, but we also provide solutions of how we address each one of those issues, and we move forward. And we're actually doing a pre-release on this book. So it's a pre-release special because the book is being released in three phases. The digital phase, which is the ebook, which is highly interactive. It's not just the writing in the book. It's video, it's links. It's about a lot of things that can take you to a lot of different places. That's the first release. The second release is the print version of the book. And the third release, which I'm excited and proud about, which will come around May of next year, is the DVD documentary of the book. And it is an hour and a half as of right now planned out of nothing but hard hitting. And I'm pulling guests together. It won't just be me, but it's some guests together coming in, and we're going to talk about all of it and how we move forward. And you can actually get all three if you get the pre-release promotion, which you can go to the site and hit the Born in Captivity click. You get it all for the price of the digital version. So for $21, you can get $100+ worth of the product. I think that's pretty much it, man. If you want to see me, I'm out there on the grind.
He is definitely out there, man. And I just thank you for, gracing us with your wisdom. And I'm pretty sure, all my melanated and illuminated listeners all throughout the diaspora and back home, can use this information. And, hopefully this is something to, will inspire someone to, research some more in order to, heal. This was about healing. And, healing for the next generation. That way we don't keep passing on the trauma from generation to generation. Man, this is me, man. Before I get out of here, I just want to leave y'all with the wise words of Wade Nobles. The essence of power is the ability to define someone's reality and make them live according to that definition as though it was a definition of their own choosing. Who has the power over your life, and how are you using the power that you have to transform? Until next time, peace.
Peace.